But first tonight, to analyse strategic and defence issues and have a retrospective look at 2021 is Professor John Blaxland from the Australian National University, who joins me once again in our Parliament House studio. John, welcome back. And
thank you, Catherine. Great to be with you.
The season, the big tree's up downstairs and you didn't wear your Santa hat in tonight. So
Not today.
I'll be fielding complaints for
today.
days. But look, it's clear, obviously, for people who follow the geopolitical debate and national defence issues, China is the standout story. As recently as today's newspapers, former President Trump was suggesting that there could be a cross-straits operation very soon after the Beijing Olympics, and we're seeing Vladimir Putin increasing pressure on Ukraine as well. Over the course of the year, I get a lot of feedback from our guests, from our audience rather, saying, gee, it's so pessimistic. It just feels like the world's ending. Like, can you give us any good news on China? So as we head into Christmas, what's the optimistic view of the escalating tensions in our region and how we can avoid war through diplomacy, yet mixing that with a posture that makes it clear to China that Taiwan's not just there for the right picking?
Yeah, so thank you, Catherine. And, you know, I'm a glass half full kind of guy.
Yep.
But, you know, as a former intelligence analyst, I like to look at the worst case scenario as well and look at the spectrum of potential courses of action that might emerge and look at capabilities and look at intentions or declarative intentions and undeclared intentions. And when you think about capability, the Chinese military capability has grown exponentially over the last 2 decades. And our attempts to build nuclear propulsion submarines pales by comparison to what's already happening in China, off Hainan Island and beyond. And then when you match that to the rhetoric on looking at the intent side of the equation, the rhetoric has been incredibly adversarial. We've been talked about being, you know, squashed under shoes. We've been all sorts of really threatening language has been used about lobbing missiles at us, etc.
And 14 demands.
And the 14 demands going back a while, but it's blown back on China. I mean, the bottom line is that it hasn't been effective, and there seems to have been a little bit of a ratcheting back on the wolf warrior diplomacy lately because it's demonstrably failed. It is the reason why the Quad works. The Quad works because India, Japan, Australia and the United States are all thinking, if we don't band together, this is going to come to haunt us. And so this actually speaks to a number of factors that are really interesting when you think about the Taiwan question, which we started talking about back in the beginning of the year.
Of course.
As you know, it's really featured on and off through the year. But Taiwan is a real conundrum for China. They want it. President Xi has made it a declaratory policy that it's going to get reincorporated into with the mainland come hell or high water. But what they did over Hong Kong, when they did effectively dissed the whole idea of one country, two systems, it meant that Taiwan was not going to go willingly. And at the same time, we've seen the wolf warrior diplomacy and the exercise of so-called sharp power has meant that India is now far less non-aligned. In the old days, India was not wanting to play with the United States and Japan or with Australia. And now it's really, the rhetoric has completely changed. There is a sense that if we do not act together to at least seek to collectively deter China from acting in a way that is not in our interests, they will get away with things. So what we're seeing now is that China's having to look at the equation again for themselves, because they're seeing that if they try and take on Taiwan, they are rhetorically, they've already seen, Peter Dutton's already put it out there, we're going to support the United States in their efforts there. But I suspect you're probably going to see India also support it, and Japan.
Japan cannot ignore it.
Japan cannot ignore it. But India's got really significant real estate. It's got the Nicobar and Andaman Islands, which are at the mouth of the Malacca Strait, the jugular vein of the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah.
It is through which the overwhelming majority of Chinese trade flows. And China knows it's really vulnerable there. And it's for years been trying to find out ways, which is one of the reasons for the BRI, the so-called Belt and Road Initiative, or One Belt, One Road, One Chinese Belt, One Chinese Road, is that it's about making them less dependent on that jugular vein. But of course, that's not the case. They're still heavily reliant. So if they also know that nobody wants to cross the nuclear threshold, right? And there's been a bit of talk about nuclear war lately, but the idea of so-called mutually assured destruction, that wonderful MAD acronym, it still stands. The bottom line is nobody, the Americans, you know, as mad as some people think Donald Trump might have been, he never went there. He never seriously contemplated using the political football, the nuclear football. The Chinese, similarly, are not disposed to use it. No one, it's never been used since 1945 in anger, and there's for very good reasons why it's highly unlikely to be so again. So short of that, what are the options? And it leaves China with some not great options, apart from a lot more huffing and puffing, hoping that they'll blow the house down, if I can stretch the metaphor.
And that's a fair point. And that cross-straits operation, as we've discussed before, and Paul Monk's joined us here doing that, is a very complex operation. But look, just back to our own capabilities, because the rhetoric, as you say, has escalated and we've played our cards pretty firmly. But the capability isn't matching, it isn't. There was a searing piece by Greg Sheridan this week reflecting on the retirement of the Super Hornet, which has been a great platform. The fact is, we've probably, despite having a very perspicacious and I think far-reaching strategic update on 1 July 2020, we're just not matching capability, really, are we? We're not getting our mutual friend Ross Babbage commissioned a good piece a few years back now, the Rip and Arm Off strategy, which was built around air power. It was DIB Mark II in terms of denial of sea and air access.
A credible, plausible deterrent capability.
Correct. And yet we seem to be going backwards. Tell our audience tonight what the state of play is. And I think we're in violent agreement. I think the investment in land platforms is plain dumb after not deploying Abrams tanks to Afghanistan. We're never going to use them. Why are we not going harder into precision strike, launched from remotely piloted aerial systems and ballistic missiles?
So I think we're trying to do that, but I think we're trying to do it too slowly. The whole point of AUKUS, apart from nuclear propulsion, was actually bolstering Australia's ability to develop the missile capabilities to strike at range, to add deterrence. I'm not sure I agree with you, though, on the land capability front. And my sense is that when we think about what we want to do to be able to deter, if we want to be able to operate the Joint Strike Fighters at range, they're actually not a long-range aircraft. They're a short-range aircraft. And if you start refuelling them with a tanker, they lose stealth. So really what you need to do is to be able to operate as a lily pad through the archipelago, which means we've got to operate in a very cooperative way with Indonesia and Papua New Guinea and others. So to do that in a contested environment, you need land power.
Indeed we do, but the USMC is lightening its force structure, and I think they're the template for archipelagic operations in the Indo-Pacific.
That's true.
I think they're smarter than we are on this.
Look, the United States Marine Corps operates in a different scale to us, and it operates in a different way. So I agree, we need to be looking at the Marine Corps model, but the US Army has still got some resonance and utility in terms of comparisons. But I also think, look, no one else is giving up on armoured vehicles in the region. The Chinese are not giving up. India certainly isn't. Indonesia's been acquiring them recently. It's not big. So much like with submarines, people are saying, oh, submarines aren't going to be useful into the future. So why is China building them dime a dozen? Why are our neighbours looking to replace the ones they've got and buy new ones and expand their fleet?
And that's a fair point.
The thing is, you need to have a variety of capabilities. The question, which I think is behind your question about the armoured vehicles, is do we want to spend $30 billion on it? That's a lot, I know, because it's money not spent on something else.
It's skewing us away from
it. It is skewing us a little bit, but I think there is still utility in us in acquiring a capability to be versatile. Here's the key point. We don't know what the future holds.
No.
And if we situate the appreciation, if we say we're going to structure our Defence Force for one scenario, that's exactly what won't happen. This is the Maginot mindset. We will defend the border because that's the way the Germans attacked us before, last time, right? Well, guess what? That's not what they did the next time. So you just have to... This is the great conundrum we face. People say, oh, why don't we have a strategy that formulates what we need? Well, what we need is a strategy that actually hedges bets because we don't know the future.
100%.
And you've got to have a variety of options out there. So, but finally, can I just make the point, you know, there's a lot of talk of war and Cold War, and this gets to your point about people having depressing news. I actually think we need to be a little bit more level-headed about this. Take the boil off this conversation and think about what we're facing as a continuum of a spectrum from cooperation through to conflict. But within the middle, you've got cooperation, competition, you've got collaboration, a bit of a compromise, contestation, coercion, conflict, and that's all happening concurrently. And when you think about it, it's happening in terms of trade, it's happening in terms of cyber, it's happening in terms of negotiations at the World Trade Organisation and deliberations with UN conventions over law of the sea, etc. That it's contested, it's competitive, and I think, you know, much like with the Quad is... It's got enormous potential benefits for Australia and for global and regional security if we see it in a positive light. Now, China is trying to portray the Quad as this war-like, you know, war-hungry kind of containment of China. I see it completely differently. I see it as a bit like sporting competition. Competition can be really healthy and constructive. And particularly if it leads to China seeking to take a more moderate position on issues and restraining itself in the face of this competition, that I think has got to be a good thing. You know, so
that makes abundant sense. And on that happier note, John, I'll tell our audience tonight: put the Christmas tree up and don't use the shovel to dig the nuclear fallout shelter just yet.
Not yet.
Thank you very much for all your contributions this year. I know they've been extraordinarily well received by our audience, get a lot of feedback to that effect. Have a great Christmas, you and Jude, and we'll talk anon.
And you, Catherine.
All the very best. Thanks, John Blaxland.